Next, we have Senator Calderon. Mr. Calderon has one item. It's a due pass as amended recommendation, AB 332.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. First, I'd like to thank the Chair and committee staff for working with my office on the amendments. AB 332 will create long-term care insurance task force to provide recommendations to the Insurance Commissioner, the Governor, and the Legislature for a variety of sustainable options for providing long-term care insurance. The lack of affordable long-term care is a problem that will continue to get worse unless we take the necessary steps to develop affordable alternatives. This bill is the first step forward to helping the most vulnerable in our society who have nowhere else to turn. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote. And with me, I have Michael Bolden with the California State Council of State Service Employees.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Michael Bolden on behalf of the Service Employees International Union as well as the United Long-Term Care Workers Union, SEIU, respectfully asking for an aye vote as co-sponsors of the bill and sponsors of the bill. And we appreciate working with the committee and the committee's recommendations for amendments, and we accept those. Thank you.
Andrew Langley on behalf of the County of Marin in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support, please come forward.
Good morning, Chair and members. Jed Hampton on behalf of Leading Age California. Our association represents over 400 not-for-profit providers of senior affordable housing and senior health care and long-term care services throughout the state. We are pleased to be in support of the bill. We have been doing quite a bit of work at the national level, looking at actuarial analyses and actuarial solutions to figuring out the long-term care crisis that we certainly face right now. Ever since the demise of the Class Act, once it was stricken from the Affordable Care Act, there has been a mad rush to kind of figure out what we can do as a nation to fund those long-term services and supports that are needed for our providers. So we're in strong support of the bill. We think that this task force will provide an opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. We're trying to wrap this up. We appreciate your comments. Finance.
We have not had the opportunity to analyze the new amendments, and so the stuff I have is from before.
Got it. Witnesses in opposition.
Not in opposition. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Robert Harrell, Deputy Insurance Commissioner for the Department of Insurance. We do have fiscal concerns with the bill. We don't disagree with the purpose and the importance of long-term care reform. However, this does have a fiscal impact to the department of roughly $230,000. But we did provide amendments to the author a while ago to modify some of the language regarding actuarial services that would significantly reduce our fiscal costs. Merely saying in the bill that it has to be within existing resources doesn't mean that if we have a mandate to do this work, that other work then doesn't get done. So we would just note that for the record. Thank you.
Sounds like opposition to me, but all right.
We've actually been working very collaboratively with the author and sponsor. It's just...
you can still be opposed and work collaboratively. This is what this building does all the time.
I'm trying to get on the other side.
Comments or questions? To be clear, Mr. Calderon, you are taking the amendments, correct?
I am.
Perfect. Just want to clarify that. Comments or questions from committee?
Just a comment. I think it's a great direction you're going in, but there is a concern. So I'm not going to vote on it today. Hopefully those amendments will remove the concerns that have been raised, but hopefully you'll get there. It's a good, noble cause, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bates. There's a motion by Senator Hill. Secretary, please call the roll.
The motion is due pass as amended to the Senate floor. Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bell? Hill? Hill, aye. Leyva? Leyva, aye. Mendoza? Mendoza, aye. Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon. We're going to keep this item open to allow other members to add on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators.
Next, we have Senator Medina. He has one item, members. This is AB 1010. It is a candidate for suspense. Senator Medina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. AB 1010 would allow part-time temporary faculty the ability to negotiate hiring policies, including evaluation procedures, maintenance of a seniority list, and placement on that list for assignments. Potential cost savings of this bill include creating a more stable workforce, reducing turnover, and cutting down administrative costs. AB 1010 creates stability for part-time temporary faculty and the students they serve.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Hello, my name is Richard Hansen. I am a faculty member at De Anza College. I teach mathematics. I'm here for the CCCI, that's the California Community College Independents. We're the unaffiliated unions in the state. I'm also here for FAC. I'm the secretary of FAC. The issues before us today are about expenses, and evaluation is already required under the Ed Code. And any remediation plans that would have to be written ought to be a part of that evaluation process already. At De Anza and Foothill, we have had reemployment preference rights since 1977. The result is a more professional part-time teaching force. This is better for students and for the efficient operation of the colleges. You can check our record in terms of student success. We're right at the top. Any costs that are associated with this bill would easily be offset by improved quality and also efficiencies. Thank you very much. I hope you'll vote to move it out of suspension.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Good morning, Jennifer Baker with the California Teachers Association. I'd like to ditto the comments that have been made by my colleague with FAC. I also wanted to note that we have a very high success rate of students when part-time faculty have more stability. And this is going to help the system to be much more efficient. We don't believe that there are going to be high costs associated with this because we're looking at more administrative costs, and we'd love to have a conversation about moving this off suspense. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Christy Balma here on behalf of the California Federation of Teachers. Also pleased to be co-sponsor of this measure, and only add that it was not noted, but even without seniority, you have the cost of rehiring and rescreening applicants, and so therefore more offsetting savings to the cost of this bill. Urge your support off suspense.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Mitch Seaman with the California Labor Federation, also in support.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. In support.
Good morning. This is John Martin from Shasta College and Butte College, and we support this bill wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Aaron Winters, part-time faculty, Los Rios Community College District, and I also support this bill.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition.
Ryan McElhaney, the Community College League of California, testifying on behalf of California's 72 community college districts. We're opposed to this measure because we're concerned of the cost implications for the community college districts who have elected to not impose or to go with seniority rights for their employment practices. Current law, they can, and we are afraid that by imposing a statewide mandate, we are going to do a statewide solution for a local issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, finance.
We don't have a position on this bill, but we also share the concern about the mandate. About 40 community college districts don't have seniority provisions included within their current collective bargaining agreements, or they include collectively bargained provisions that conflict with the requirements of this bill. All 72 community college districts could be eligible to file reimbursement claims if the Commission on State Mandates determines that this bill establishes a reimbursable state-mandated local program, even if they're already complying with the provisions of this bill. Assuming that each district required at least one staff and $100,000 to establish seniority programs or meet other requirements, the bill could result in a reimbursable state mandate of about $7.2 million.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, Mr. Medina, would you like to close?
Yes. First, let me say that I think there may have been a mistake in the fiscal analysis that came forward, and I just asked that be looked at because I know there was a mistake in the analysis. And then finally, let me just say that I know that AB 1010 would lead to better student outcomes, less need for remedial and repeated courses, and more efficient delivery of instruction. For those reasons, I respectfully ask for your consideration.
Thank you. You're saying my staff made a mistake or finance?
Well, I know that in the analysis, in someone's fiscal analysis, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry that I don't know whose, there was a mistake with a zero. This
is where you blame
in the placement of a zero.
Thank you. Without objection, we'll move this item to suspense. Thank you, Mr. Medina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, we have Senator Linder. Buenos dias. Members, Senator Linder has AB 1171. It has a due pass recommendation. Senator Linder, the floor is yours.
Buenos dias, Mr. Chairman and Senators. AB 1171 authorizes regional transportation agencies with expressway projects in their sales tax expenditure plans and that are not in the state highway system to utilize the construction manager / general contractor procurement method. These eligible regional agencies currently enjoy the authority to use design-build authority for implementation of these local projects. AB 1171 would grant them the use of CMGC as an additional alternative delivery method. This bill does not change current design-build authority nor expand the number of qualified local projects for alternative delivery methods, but provides CMGC authority for use on previously eligible projects as another project tool delivery. Protections have also been added that require local agencies to present an evaluation comparing CMGC and other project delivery alternatives before choosing to utilize the CMGC method. To be clear, AB 1171 is strictly limited to local agencies and will not have any fiscal impact or cause an increased allocation of state funds to regional transportation agencies. With me, I have several witnesses to testify, experts, including Mark Watts on behalf of Capital Southeast Connectors, JPA.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chairman and members, I'm here today in strong support on behalf of the Riverside County Transportation Commission and the Capital Southeast Connector Joint Powers Authority. Both have projects that would qualify. We're going to be building those in segments, and we would use the design build on more of the direct design feature projects, but the more complicated ones would use this. So urge your support for this measure. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Markson for the American Society of Civil Engineers in strong support. This is a technique that has been shown to be very valuable in other jurisdictions. Support it for California.
And Mr. Chairman, members, Dave Ackerman representing the Associated General Contractors. In support, we supported legislation for San Diego Association of Governments in Santa Clara using similar methods, and this extends that process to these specific projects. We ask for your support.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Bruce Mignani on behalf of California Concrete Contractors Association in support.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
This bill doesn't have a direct state fiscal impact as it relates only to projects not on the state highway system, and any assistance gotten from Caltrans on local projects would be reimbursed by the requesting regional agency.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? There's a motion by Senator Leyva. Mr. Linder, would you like to close?
Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. It's a great bill. Secretary, please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to the Senate floor. Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Hill? Aye. Hill, aye. Leyva? Leyva, aye. Mendoza? Nielsen? Nielsen, aye.
Mr. Linder, we're going to keep the roll open on your item to allow other members to add on. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
De nada. Members, I am going to present Senator Atkins' bill. This is item AB 96. We're going to pass the gavel to our vice chair. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members. It is my pleasure to present AB 96 on behalf of our speaker, Tony Atkins. AB 96 will ban the sale of ivory and rhinoceros horns and close the loophole in current law that has allowed the sale of illegally poached ivory in California. The current poaching crisis is devastating elephant and rhino populations as demand for elephant ivory and rhino horns grow. Not only is the killing of elephants and rhinos threatening those animals' extinction, but the sale of these products are the primary source of funding for rebel terrorist groups that are notorious for committing terrible human rights violations, such as Boko Haram. Enforcing this bill will take resources, but as noted in the analysis, these cost pressures of enforcement are not new. The cost for staffing and equipment cited as necessary by the Department of Fish and Wildlife are costs that could incur now to enforce the current ban on the sale of elephant parts. Except the state has been relying on federal government for enforcement. In fact, this bill can reduce enforcement cost pressures by simplifying the investigation of potential violations. The state's current ban on elephant tusks has proven difficult to enforce as it allows an exemption for ivory imported prior to 1977, a fact which is too easily falsified. Importation date will no longer need to be investigated under this bill. Because this bill is very clear and enacts a near total ban on ivory, it will be relatively simple for state wildlife officers to enforce. Additionally, this bill will give the department flexibility in charging civil and criminal penalties, options that will increase the chances that violators of this ban will be cited appropriately. Any enforcement costs incurred can be offset by the fines and penalties collected for violations. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Witnesses in support.
Good morning. Jennifer Fearing on behalf of the Humane Society of the United States, Defenders of Wildlife, and the San Francisco SPCA. Thank you, Senator Lara, Madam Speaker, and the 20 other bipartisan co-authors of this important and urgent bill. California must join New York, New Jersey, the federal government, and foreign governments in Asia and Africa to stop the rhino horn and ivory trade. In the past 5 years, poachers have killed 65,000 elephants in Mozambique, which is 60% of their herd, and 10,000 elephants in Tanzania, or half their herd. There remains a single, that's one, male northern white rhino left in the wild. We are the first to agree that DFW needs and deserves additional funding to support law enforcement activities, not just to stop the pernicious illegal wildlife parts trade, but to properly enforce all of California's natural resources laws. But as Senator Lara just said and as described in the analysis, AB 96 arguably reduces existing enforcement cost pressures. We have a decades-old policy prohibiting the ivory trade, and AB 96 tightens up exemptions. What's more, significant documentation is already required under federal law for anyone selling ivory within or beyond California. Accordingly, while we appreciate DFW's legitimate need for additional enforcement funding, we feel the costs that were given to this bill are excessive. We will continue to advocate for additional enforcement funding for DFW, but we would urge your aye vote for AB 96.
Additional witnesses in support? Those in opposition?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kathy Lynch, representing the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Safari Club International, Outdoor Sportsmen's Coalition of California, and California Sportsmen. So I'm all in strong opposition to this bill. Safari Club International is renowned in its work in Africa, particularly with enforcement agencies, putting millions of dollars on the ground to help with enforcement. I think we can all agree that poaching is a horrible thing, and no legitimate sportsman supports that. However, this bill is a major problem. This is going to impact inheritance. This is a government taking. This sets up bounty hunting. It's going to increase the black market. This is asset forfeiture. This bill never went to Public Safety or Judiciary Committee. If you look at the definition of sale, you will see some significant challenges and tripping hazards for law-abiding citizens. People that don't possess paperwork. If you have ivory in your home now and you don't have the historical paperwork, it's almost impossible to get. How are you going to prove that? It's going to ban you from putting it into an estate sale. When an estate sale occurs, you take the whole lot and you sell it. This creates no pathway for that. The proponents like to talk about New York and other states that have done this. This is true, but New York set up a registration process. If you'll note, that has been deleted from this bill. So there's no legal pathway for people to comply with this law. As the author points out, this sets up criminal and civil penalties that are severe. These penalties are more severe than a felon in possession of a firearm in California. And lastly, I would like to point out that, yes, the fish and game wardens, we do not have enough of them in California. That's long been a budget conversation that you've had. However, this does not, you cannot take the preservation account and use it for endangered species. It's prohibited. And yet they're going to deposit fines money in the preservation account. Well, that's all well and good, but you're going to have to set up a sub-account. None of those things have been established. So there's going to be a merging of this. You're now going to send wardens into urban centers to do retail. If that's their current burden, that's being shared by the federal government now. So we're going to be sending them into retail establishments, and I would argue most of these are minority-owned small businesses, and there's some case law about protecting those businesses when it's minority focused, that I think we're going to run into some serious legal challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition, and please, focus on the fiscal implications in your testimony.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Ed Worley with the National Rifle Association. What this bill does is sweeps firearms into the regulatory world of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. There are many firearms that are historical firearms, they're antique firearms. They're firearms that have had ivory as a decorative inlay in them for years and generations. What this will require, unlike what the proponents claim, is now the Department of Fish and Wildlife is going to be regulating guns, because it will be illegal for you to sell a gun that has ivory on it. Therefore, firearms dealers will have to go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife to ascertain whether the firearm meets the specifications of the so-called exemptions that are in it, the 5% rule. We've had discussions with the Speaker's office about how you determine what 5% of ivory is on a gun, by a volume, by a weight, about how you do it. So what you're going to have is, in the cost perspective, is you're going to have an increasing cost, because nobody at the Department of Fish and Wildlife has any expertise in firearms. Nobody at the Department of Fish and Wildlife has any real expertise on the current firearms laws and the whole regulatory maze we've created in California when it comes to firearms. So you're going to have dealers who will not be able to go to the Department of Justice to find out if they can sell the gun or not. They're going to have to go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Nobody at the Department of Fish and Wildlife is going to know. Are they going to give a dealer basically a due pass and say, okay, this firearm only has 4.9% ivory in it, therefore you can transfer it? Well, if the dealer doesn't realize that there's ivory beads or ivory sights or the inlay on the firearm is ivory, and then they go about attempting to sell the gun or attempting to broker their gun or attempting to sell it for a trust or an estate, now they've run afoul of being guilty of the violation. So now the problem is, now the Department of Fish and Wildlife is going to be out regulating gun stores. If you go to any of the commission hearings or you follow any of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they do not have the wardens currently to do the workload they have. If this bill is so imperative and so critical, therefore you should fund wardens to do the job. That's part of our concern if it is, because now any of my members who attempt to transfer even to a fellow family member or an aunt or an uncle, imagine a grandparent trying to give a gun that they inherited from their grandfather that has ivory inlay in it, just to give it to their grandson. Now they're going to have to go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife and find out, can I transfer it? The proponents say, well, don't worry about it, just transfer it out of state. The proponents say, don't worry about it, we'll figure all this out. Well, let me tell you something. Being here for 24 years with the NRA and doing guns and legislation, that's the last thing you want to do, is just throw it down the road and say, we'll figure this out later on. Because now what you've done is you put firearms dealers in peril. Because now if they just attempt to transfer the gun for the private party transfer from one private person to another person, or one family member to another member, now that they've brokered the transaction in ivory, they could lose their license. They could go to jail. So those are part of our concerns about the bill and the financial fiscal impacts of the bill. Therefore, we would respectfully request that the bill stay on suspense until these issues have been worked out. Thank you very much.
Okay. Additional speaker in opposition?
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Tom Pedersen on behalf of California Rifle and Pistol. Thank you. On behalf of California Rifle and Pistol Association, we're opposed to the bill, but we certainly understand the author's efforts, and we do agree that illegal commercialization of wildlife is a terrible thing, and we don't support it. But in terms of the bill relating to firearms owners, I'll just give you a quick example. There are a lot of folks that have firearms that were made in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they happen to have either ivory inlay, or they might have an ivory sight or a bead or whatever, a small part of the object. Fact of the matter is, they're classic. They were built that way. They're not used quite as, it's not used quite as much now, but however, the problem is they have the firearm, they have no documentation because the person that made it is dead. Consequently, there's nothing in the bill that allows a person to self-certify or obtain any sort of a permit. We've asked for that several times in committee. The fiscal aspects of this are going to be impacted because you're going to have a person that's a regular person inadvertently snagged up in this. there's someone that doesn't know about it because there isn't going to be a lot of public outreach. The department is going to have to be able to put cases together to support the program. The penalty assessments won't rise to the level that you're seeing now with the problem with traffic fines, but average people aren't going to be able to afford to pay it. And so you're going to have this problem where people are being snagged up in a program that was meant to do the right thing, but this is a serious problem. And like I say, there's no way to document things if the person that made the firearm, which by the way is a real classic valuable firearm, because they're dead. So for that and many other reasons, we continue in opposition, but we look forward to some sort of resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional speakers in opposition? Department of Finance.
The Department of Fish and Wildlife indicates that this bill will result in costs of approximately $1.8 million general fund to implement the provisions and $1.2 million in ongoing costs to enforce the new crime created by this bill. The department believes that 8 positions would be required to develop methods for morphological identification of ivory, to investigate and issue citations, review cases, and support the implementation of the administrative penalty, and provide staff support. While we understand that it is potentially within the purview of the Department of Fish and Wildlife to enforce the existing crimes, we think that moving this to the Fish and Game Code specifically instead of just the penal code adds additional cost pressure for the department to enforce these violations. The department also thinks that it could be subject to significant litigation costs when seizing an individual's property for further investigation. We're not sure as a department the extent to which there will really, sorry, the Department of Finance is not sure, the extent to which resources will be needed, and any request for additional resources would be reviewed in detail during the budget process. Of course, we're also concerned with increasing jail time for misdemeanors. By increasing punishments for these new misdemeanors from 30 days to up to 1 year in jail, this bill could have an impact on the county jail population and impose new costs and workload on counties. Finally, the Department of Justice indicates that this bill does not have a significant fiscal impact. However, there are several other bills this session that would result in no significant fiscal impact to the DOJ if enacted individually, but in aggregate could result in the need for additional resources.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee members? Yeah. Senator Nielsen.
I have to raise the objection that goes beyond this bill. It's rampant in the legislature now, bill after bill, year after year, imposing what I consider absolutely excessive fines. We're dealing with it in groundwater legislation right now. That is a violation of the private property right of that landowner. This is a private property right of someone who enjoys having something that has ivory inlay in. And a fine of $500 to $10,000, and that's per incident. And in all of these cases, there's no due process. It's the arbitrary power, unless you go to prosecute, and that's another burden. You may be prosecuted. While simultaneously, this legislature is going easy on some of the worst offenders, and those are headed towards being the worst offenders. We're leaving them in our community to be predators upon our citizens, our private citizens. So we've initiated a crime wave, and now we're fussing around with someone who has some ivory. I particularly object to that in terms of someone passing that on to an heir as a family heirloom and treasure. But the most egregious thing is it's much broader than this bill. It is all the other agencies that are doing the same thing. They're going off the state budget and levying incredible fines upon the citizens of California. I think there are other ways to address this. There's nothing in this bill that goes after the real offenders, the poachers. If we're going to do something and criminalize somebody and put them in prison or jail, then that should be your target population, not the law-abiding citizens of California.
Any additional comments? Then, Senator Lara, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. This is a candidate for suspense, and look forward to continue to work on this measure while it's in suspense. I know we had a lengthy policy discussion, but I wanted to make a couple of clarifications. You know, yes, some guns do include small bits of ivory. Since AB 96 clearly exempts bona fide antiques comprised of less than 5% of ivory, guns that meet this criteria are exempted under this bill. Additionally, to sell any ivory, you already must have documentation. That is part of the federal law. And in closing, the sale This is a sales bill. Inheritance and gifting are not affected under this bill. I want to thank the speaker for working on that. And again, I hope as this bill is in suspense, we continue to work out on some of these policy issues that were brought up today. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Shallara. That bill is off to suspense.